Okay, got it. Thank you, Jay. It's always a pleasure to see you and to be asked to participate in my recovery. My name is Sean Maloney. I'm an alcoholic. Uh, um, well, I suffered from untreated alcoholism long before I ever took my first drink. Um, I got sober June 11th, 1988. I was young, but I was done. I wanted to be part of that 27 club. You know, I had no intention of living till I was 30, and I was fine with that. I thought I'd done everything I could do, and I was tired. I lived in a studio apartment. If I like to tell people it was the Hollywood Hills, but it was a street called Barham, which was next to the freeway. It was a single. It was like a prison room, brick building. I had a beat up car in the driveway and a motorcycle I get on almost every night. And I take it to the Vine Street exit. And next to the Vine Street exit, there's the infamous Capitol Records building that they built to look like records stacked on each other with a needle on top. And they put a Christmas tree on that building every year. And I'd be at that light saying to myself, this is the last time I'm going to do this. So this is the last time I'm going to drain the ATM $20 at a time. This is the last time I'm going to find myself on Argyle Street, you know, in front of one of those buildings, copying from one of those guys. This is the last time I'm going to find myself in that studio apartment, you know, with the windows gelled out and on my hands and knees, you know, looking for something to put in the pipe on the floor while those guilty birds are chirping outside and the sun is coming up. I swear this is the last time I'm going to do this. And I would watch that Christmas tree go up on the Capitol Records building, come back down and go back up again. And it was like another year had spun around. It was like hamster on a hamster wheel. I couldn't stop. I grew up in LA. My mom and dad, my mom grew up in Hollywood. She met my dad in an acting class. They got cast in the same movie together, where they went to Hawaii to make this movie and got engaged there. They came back, bought the house, had the two kids. It would have been the happy Hollywood ending if it wasn't for untreated alcoholism. And like I said, I suffered from this disease long before I ever took the first drink, just as a matter of being exposed to the insanity of untreated alcoholism as a young child. I watched a lot of violence. I watched my dad and mom fight. I watched my dad hurt my mom. I remember being on the counter of the kitchen waiting for the police to come. I was 3 because he left by the time I was 4. The counter of the bathroom, the tile, I can still feel it. It was cold and he was shaving and I'm, you know, scared because they're going to take my dad away. And I was angry at my mom for her participation in this fight that separated my dad and I for the moment I had him, and full of shame because, you know, I felt that way when she was in the next room covered in blood. And it's like fear, shame, and anger. It was untreated alcoholism. My dad finally bowed out. He went off to start another family, and my mom was left to raise my brother and I by herself. So, and she was an alcoholic, and she didn't have any tools. And the kind of violence I saw between my dad and mom, she turned on my brother. And I mean, I used to sleep under my bed with a baseball bat growing up because I was always afraid. There was a house across the street. I used to sit out on the front porch just to get out of stuff, just to get out of the house. And there was a house across the street, and I saw a for sale sign go up, and then a sold sign, and then a big moving truck pulled up, and followed by a station wagon. This beautiful mom got out. She had 2 beautiful daughters, and the dad rolled in the Porsche, and he mowed the lawn on the weekends, and he smoked a pipe. And I just wanted to walk across the street and walk from my house to that house and be part of that family. But not having any of the social skills that I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous, the best way I could think of to introduce myself was to put a smoke bomb on their front door. And it wasn't very sophisticated because I made it at 11 years old, and it didn't smoke, it burned, caught the front door on fire, and it could have burned the house down. I was hiding behind a tree when the police were taking the report, and I saw the mom giving the information to the cops, and next to her holding her dress was this little girl, and she looked at me And I knew by the way she looked at me, she knew I had done it. And I was just waiting for her to raise her arm up, point me out, and the police to take me away like they'd taken my dad away. But she didn't rat me out. Was I an alcoholic at that point? I don't know. I was yet to have my first drink. Was I suffering from untreated alcoholism? 100%. And the solution to that suffering was alcohol. I took a dare at my grandmother's house shortly after that smoke bomb thing. My cousin had put up 3 shot glasses of Jim Beam, and I don't have to tell you what happened. When I took the 3rd shot, that first shot, the fear went away. The second shot, the anger went away, and the 3rd shot, that shame went away, and I'd found the solution, and it was on, and it worked until it didn't. I was always trying to fit in. Always trying to fit in. I always felt like I was an alien, like I came from the wrong family. I was also brought up in a household where it was really important how you looked on the outside. We didn't talk about feelings. I mean, ever, because if you shared anything about how you felt, it might betray how you appeared. And we were sent out into the world to look good, family full of actors and performers. And I was taught how to perform so everything appeared good. And so I never fit in anywhere. I was asked to leave the private school I was at, because my grades dropped because I started smoking weed on the football field. I was 7th grade. I went to my next high school, which was North Hollywood High, where I promptly got arrested off campus for possession, hanging out with the stoners there, and asked to leave that school. Well, it wasn't asked to leave. I was kicked out and sent to another school where I made a vow to myself, a pact. Because I didn't want to be that loser guy. I didn't want to be that person that didn't amount to anything. It was really important in our family to be somebody. And I could see I was going nowhere fast. So I made a pact at the next school that I wasn't going to hang out with the stoners or the losers. I was going to hang out with the smart kids. And the smart kids at my next high school didn't smoke weed, they snorted coke. So I learned how to do that at Grant High School. So I'm in my middle teens, and it's already on. And I want to get into the solution because that's where the story changes. But I will share that I thought I finally found my people when a friend of mine came over to my house with a record by a band called the Ramones. And he said, they're going to be playing in town and we're going to go see them. And they were playing at a place called the Golden West Ballroom in Norwalk, California. And I stepped into that place and I had found my people. There were guys fighting on the dance floor, nodding off against the wall. And I walked into the bathroom and the singer of that band was splashing his face. His shirt was pulled up, his back was white as paper, and he turned around and he looked at me, and I knew he didn't give an F what I thought of his music, and I wanted what he had. It didn't matter how anything looked to him, and I'd found my people. It was shortly thereafter I left LA for 6 weeks, touring the United States and Canada, Northern America, with 2 Southern California punk rock bands. We were making a little documentary, and we were on the road for 6 weeks. And this is before there was internet. This was before there was cell phones. This is when the means of communication was one telephone booth to the next, and maps. And it was a big party. It was a great, big, long 6-week party where every night was a different, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, except for this one town just outside of DC, where everybody was clean. All the kids were running around with X's on their hands. There were no cigarette butts, no beer cans lying around. There were rules on the wall that everyone seemed to follow. And I said to the guy that ran the house, I said, what's with the X's? And he said, you don't know about straight edge. And I said, I have no idea what's that. And he said, well, we don't do drugs, we don't drink alcohol, and we don't have promiscuous sex. And I thought, okay, this is really fucking hardcore music. But I went and saw that guy play that night in Baltimore, and he put the Ramones to shame. And I remember thinking to myself, I could never do what he does sober, because I knew if I took away my medicine, my solution to my untreated alcoholism, which I didn't even know I had, for a minute, that fear and that shame and that anger would just rush over me like a tsunami. You know, it was good for Ian, but not for Sean. I got back to LA. My mom had remodeled and rented out my room. So I was on the streets, found an empty apartment in Hollywood to, hang out in until I found that place on Barham. And, the 80s were a fun time to be in LA. But it was also, I was hanging out with people that would come over to my little tiny place and leave with stuff that didn't belong to them. And I didn't have much to take, but I realized that it was time to lock it up. So I locked it up. I put gels on the windows. I turned the answering machine on, and my world got very, very small. Like that scene in Star Wars where the walls close in. I'd been broken into a few times. Again, there's nothing to take, but it was in a weird area. And I walked into the bathroom one night, and I saw somebody that startled me, tiny little bathroom, and it scared me. And then I realized it was me. It was my reflection in the mirror, and I didn't recognize myself. I was a ghost. There was a knock at the door. I had told somebody I would help them do something like move furniture. I had no idea what the word service meant. I had no tools in my toolkit for anything but selfish, self-serving things. And I opened the door, and my friend looked at me and he said, "It looks like you're dying." And he was right. He wasn't in AA, but he knew about it. So he came in and he opened up a Yellow Pages, and he found the closest meeting to me, and he tore out the page, circled it, put it on my refrigerator, and said, "I want you to promise me you'll go here on Monday." And I kept my promise. I got on my bike, my motorcycle, and I rode to Unit A, which was on Lankershim in North Hollywood. And for those that aren't familiar with LA, Lankershim crosses over with another street called Vineland, and they intersect. Well, I went to the right address on the wrong street and walked into a low-grade mental hospital. And I was in there for, there were guys talking to walls and drooling on themselves and circling in wheelchairs. And I was in there for 15 minutes before I realized it wasn't AA. And they were kind enough to direct me to the right place. And I walked into Unit A, and I swear to God, I couldn't tell the difference from where I'd just been to where I was standing. Everyone looked like they were 100 years old. It's when you could smoke in meetings. It looked like the apocalypse inside. All the walls were yellow, and they had these strange steps and traditions on the wall. And I thought those were rules, and I didn't like rules. And I thought my life is over. But something happened that day at Unit A that changed the trajectory of my life. I said I was brought up in a house where it was really important, to look good and not share how you felt. And in this room of all these strangers that I had nothing in common with, that seemed to me to be 100 years old, I heard the language of the heart. Because you guys started to share, and something in you connected with something in me, and it was enough to keep me coming back. And I started going to a regular meeting at 4343 Radford, which was the original Radford Clubhouse in Studio City. And I was on that pink cloud in my first 90 days. I even met her in an acting class, and she was beautiful. She was 19. She was on her way to stardom, and I'd found my new drug. And, she hung in with me that summer, and then she was gone. And I remember that feeling when she wouldn't answer her phone, and she wouldn't come to her door, and she wouldn't leave me messages on my answering machine. I didn't want to drink. I didn't want to get loaded. I just wanted to die, because I had no defense against those feelings that I had put to sleep so long ago. It was just pain, pure pain. And instead of doing something stupid, I called a man I'd heard share in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. He was a member of my men's meeting on Monday night, and he seemed to know what he was talking about, and he seemed like he had a handle on this thing, and he was cool. He wasn't a chump. And I called him and I said, "She's gone." He listened, and I said, "I don't think she's coming back." And he listened, and I said, "I'm in a lot of pain." And he listened, and I said again, "She's not coming back." And he listened, and I said, "She's really gone." And he listened, and I said, "I'm really hurting." And this went on for a while. I realized it was a one-way conversation, and I knew how to do that. I shut my mouth, and at felt like minutes went by. It was probably a few seconds. This guy said to me, "How can I help you today, Sean?" And any other day of my life, my response would have been, "You know what? You're supposed to have the answers. I'm calling you for help. I'm telling you I'm in pain, and you're asking how you can help. F you, hang up the phone." I believe to this day the words that came out of my mouth were divinely inspired, because this was not me talking. I said, "What would you do if you were me?" And he said, "That's a great place for us to start. I want you to get your big book and a pad of paper and come to my house, and I'm going to show you what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous." He called it the work. "I'm going to show you how to do the work in AA." And his name was Scott Redmond, and he'd be my sponsor for the next 15 years. And he taught me how to pick up a simple kit of spiritual tools. He taught me how to put my fears on paper. Simply, I am afraid of ... I am afraid of bridges. I'm afraid of spiders. I'm afraid of you. I'm afraid of me. I'm afraid of everything. It says in the book, 100, driven by 100 forms of fear. And he said that that was modest. He taught me how to address my sexual misconduct by answering the second paragraph on page 69. Where was I wrong? Who did I hurt? Where did I arouse jealousy, bitterness, envy? What should I have done instead? Big question. And he taught me how to do that inventory by columns. My resentments, I am pissed off at, the reason, what it affects. He called it a SPAPS: self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal, and sexual relations. And that magic fourth column, my defective character, that if God would remove, I would no longer have a resentment. I think he also said, stay away from the women in AA. And I left feeling very discouraged that day. Not because of that, but because I just didn't think it was going to work for me. I didn't doubt it worked. I could see it in your eyes. I just didn't think it was going to work for me, because the only person I could think of to put on that 4-step in my resentment list, which I could write very easily, was my dad. I could write, I am pissed off at my dad for leaving, for being an absent father, for beating up my mom, for starting a new family, for loving my stepbrother, my half brother, more than he loves me. I had a number of legitimate resentments. And I could say it affected my self-esteem and my ambitions and my personal relations. But what possibly could I put in that fourth column? What part could a 3-year-old kid have in his dad doing such things and then not coming back? And I knew if Scott didn't have a good answer, I'd be out of there and you'd have a different speaker. I'll tell you what Scott said. He said, "Sean, first of all, I never said anything to you about your part. That's not what we put in that fourth column. What we put in the fourth column is our defects of character, that if God would remove, we would no longer have the resentment. And maybe your defective character pertaining to this resentment against your father is your unwillingness to accept the spiritual sickness of another child of God. Because if a man could do that to his wife in front of his little boy, he must be sick." And a light bulb went on. I got it. I thought I was crazy when I got here. The kind of stuff that I did over and over again. I'd wake up the next morning, holy, I can't believe I did that last night. And I'm not a Mensa smart, but I'm not a dumbass either. So I knew there must be something wrong with me. And it must be that I'm just mentally ill. I'm crazy. Why else would I do these things? And you guys said, yeah, you're probably crazy. We're all a little crazy, but we're not interested in your crazy here. What we want you to do is catch alcoholism. So I caught alcoholism that day, and I was all in. I had a friend who had 3 days. He was somebody that I had partied with pretty heavily. We did a lot of outside issues together, and he had 3 days sober, and he told me he was gonna go out and get loaded. It was Halloween weekend. I used to love Halloween before I got sober. I don't know, somehow it lost its gleam after sobriety, but then I had kids and it changed again. But I told him I'd go out with him. We'd go to Hollywood and we'd have a sober Halloween together. And we went to this club and we were in line to get in. And there were like 10 pirates in front of me and 1 pirate's winch. And I remembered what he said about staying away from the women in AA. So I went up to this girl and I said, "Are you in AA?" And she said, "No." So I got her number and we went out. We didn't have a love connection per se. So for the next 6 months, we just slept together. Then she came into AA and we stopped sleeping together and we started walking the path. Now, I am arrogant today. much less than I was back then, but I have learned to call myself on my arrogance. And this girl was interested in where this relationship was going. And I told her that if I was going to marry anyone, it would be her, but I was married to my art. So she broke up with me. And she called me from Palm Springs. She was down there with her girlfriend, and she was worried about her dad. Her dad had 5 years in AA. He was a film editor at Universal. And he came to her and said, you know what, I really need to have these martini lunches with my peers because I want to be able to fit in. And all she heard was because, and that was all she heard. It was like Charlie Brown talking. And she'd been really worried about him, and there was nothing that she could do. He decided to cash in his chips for sobriety. But she had this vision in Palm Springs while she was dancing of her father laying on the ground. And she called me. I thought she just wanted to get back together, but she said, will you go with me? And I said, yes, of course. So we went to her condo, his condo in Burbank, and it was across the street from the Alano Club in Burbank. And I had to break in through a window. And it looked like someone had ransacked the place. Everything was turned upside down. And I walked the condo and I went to the back bedroom and the bathroom, and he wasn't there. So I'm coming to let her in the front door. And I noticed on the bureau next to the front door were keys and a wallet. And I looked to my right and I saw his feet. And he'd been dead for 3 days. And when we went to clean out the drawers of his chest of drawers, in the bottom of the drawer were over 100 welcome chips and a cassette tape. And I don't know why they don't do this anymore, but back when I got sober, when somebody got their chip, people would say, how did you do it? And you'd share for a couple of minutes. Well, on this cassette tape that we listened to was her father rehearsing what he was going to say when he got his 30-day chip. And I realized at that moment that this girl had grown up in the same house that I had. It was all about how it looked on the outside, And I had a shift in my feelings about her and about my future. And I got her friends together on her next birthday and had them all come to the merry-go-round at Griffith Park. And I bought this cheap little ring that I didn't have a pot to piss in, but I bought this ring and asked her to marry me. And she said yes. And we've been married ever since. We've been married. We just celebrated 30 years. When we got pregnant for the first time, thank you. I was terrified. And I called my sponsor and I said, I'm really scared. He said, do a 10-step, call me back. So this is what I wrote. I'm terrified of being a father. I am afraid of having a son. I'm afraid if I have a son, I will be a shitty father. I'm afraid of being a father because I don't know anything about baseball. I'm afraid I don't know how to throw a ball. I don't know how to catch a ball. I don't know the rules of baseball. I'm afraid if I have a son, I will be a terrible father. And what Scott could have said to me when I read him that is, you know what, come on over and we'll watch a Dodger game. Or he could have said, come on over and I'll throw a ball back and forth with you. What he did say became and has remained my mantra in Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, Sean, you do your job in AA and everything else is going to take care of itself. And I'll say it again, just because I like hearing it. You do your job in AA and everything else is going to take care of itself. And he was right. My first kid was a girl. So we dodged that bullet. I had 2 more kids. The next was a boy. He wasn't interested in baseball at all. He was more into computers. But by the time the third came along, he was holding a baseball in his hand for the moment he could sit up. And I'd been doing my job and I wasn't so scared. And the next thing I know, I'm assistant coach on his team. And I watched that kid win 4 championships in a row at Sherman Oaks Little League. And I never missed a game. And I was sitting in the bleachers at one of his games. And I remembered this memory that I'd had when I was his age. I was so damaged from untreated alcoholism, so messed up. They thought there was something mentally wrong with me. They sent me to the pediatrician and they did a check. And he said, there's nothing wrong with this kid. Just get him involved in something. My mom put me on a little league team. I didn't know what I was doing. My dad came to one game and I struck out. And I remember being so ashamed of myself to let my dad down. And I'm sitting there watching my kid play and I realized, oh my God, I'd gotten it all wrong. Because you guys have taught me over and over again, it's not what I take from anything, it's what I can bring. Let's see, I want to share about the God thing. I'm sorry, I never take notes, but I shared recently at Radford, and I've got so much to share. I want to be able to give you the full story and my experience, strength, and hope. I want to talk about the God thing for a minute, and I know that for a lot of guys that I work with, they have a hard time with it, and they seem to fall into two camps. One camp is the camp that doesn't believe in God at all, that thinks it's a fantasy, thinks it's like a cartoon, or the Tooth Fairy, or Santa Claus. It's science is king. The other is the idea that you came into AA with is the God you understood and learned growing up, and that was my direction. I've been raised Catholic, and I'm not one of those people that refers to himself as a recovering Catholic. I think there was a lot of stuff that I got out of the teachings that are very powerful and that line up with what I do in AA. But I also believe, for whatever reason, I was taught that God was, a punishing God, and I had done a lot of bad things out there, and I knew it, and I was willing to take the whooping because I knew I'd done it. But right now, I'm making up for that by doing all these great things in AA. And in the meantime, God, you stay on your side of the room and I'll stay on mine, and we'll leave each other alone until it's time for me to pay the price. That's the God that I grew up with, and I was able to get a bigger God. If I can get to that, I will share about that. But I tell the guys that I work with today, look for the coincidences. We talk about God shots, or is it odd, or is it God? Or synchronicity is what Jung called it, and he's mentioned in our book, or just, coincidence. I sponsored this guy that was in an old punk band called the Angry Samoans, and a couple of years ago, he wanted to go up to Joshua Tree for a kind of a punk rock reunion. And I took him up there, and there was a guy up there that he just met who had a band called the Weirdos back in the day. And we hung out. I took this kid back to his house, and as I'm driving home, I see a bumper sticker in front of me that says, "I am a weirdo." And there's a God shot. Thank you. It doesn't have to be profound. It just has to be connected. And I tell the guys that I work with, the more you look for them, the more you'll see them, and the more eventually you'll have to concede that it's not just a coincidence. And it works. I want to talk about what I have not had to drink over in 36 years, because I'm the guy that would get loaded if I broke a shoelace. That was me. If you think I'm being glib, allow me to illustrate. If you're an alcoholic like me and you break a shoelace, you probably don't have a spare one in the kitchen, drawer, or anywhere in the apartment, and you have to leave the apartment to go buy another shoelace. And then you have to find the right length, and you have to find the right color, and it's probably on that rack with all the tape and everything that spins around in the liquor store, and you have to talk to somebody, and you have to go back to the apartment, open the package. You got to take the old shoelace off and put the new shoelace on. I mean, then you're left with a dilemma. You have one shoe with the new shoelace, one shoe with an old shoelace. I mean, come on, isn't it easier just to smoke crack? That's how I roll. So I want to share about what I haven't had to get loaded over in the last 36 years. I had a brother who was the result of my dad's second marriage, and I was very jealous of him growing up, as I mentioned. He went to the private school that taught classes in French. He had all the new toys. He wore the jacket with the crest on it. And most of all, he had my dad. And then when my dad left his mom to marry his third wife, I realized he didn't have anything. I wasn't missing out. And we became very good friends. His success was meteoric. He got very successful, very young. He was making $3 million a year before he was 30. And this is 25 years ago. There's an Irish rock band I'm sure you've all heard of. And the singer of that band invited my brother to go to Ireland and hang out at his house, which was a castle. And I only share that with you to illustrate the kind of life my brother was leading and living. and he had this disease and he couldn't get this thing. And he tried. He really did. He tried and he suffered. And his solution to his untreated alcoholism in his house on Mulholland Drive that looked over all of Los Angeles was to hang himself in his shower. And I didn't have to take a drink. My first thought after I heard the news and got up off the floor was I got to get to a meeting. And I had a commitment at a men's stag. I was a co-secretary and it wasn't my week. And I walked in there and the other secretary asked me to lead the meeting. And you guys surrounded us. You held us. You came into my apartment and you literally fed me. We had 2 little babies at the time. I didn't know how I was going to take the next breath, much less live another day. It was surreal. When we were driving to the funeral in the limousine that my brother's company had supplied us, Scott was sitting across from me and he pointed out the window at the Capitol Records building. This was November 16th, 1999. The Christmas tree had just gone up. And I realized it was inches and seconds because I was supposed to be the guy that's 6 feet under at Hollywood forever, not Jay. Jay was the successful one. He was the one with game. He was the charismatic one. I was the punk rock loser. But you know what? I got that he didn't, was what we have for the magic of AA. And I don't use that word lightly. There's something about this solution that transcends all my worst experiences. I don't know let me see how much time I have because I want to be able to I have a few minutes. 9 months after my brother died, his mother, my stepmother, died of a broken heart. She got cancer almost immediately. I was carrying her casket out of the same chapel I'd carried Jay out of. And unbeknownst to me, she had procured the same grave. I thought she was going to be buried next to my brother, but instead she chose to be buried in his grave. So I didn't know this, and I got to the gravesite and saw my brother's open grave, and I lost my shit. I went out of my mind. And I was so pissed off at God. And I told my sponsor, and he said, you know what? You got to get a bigger God. You got to because he told me to write a resentment list against God, a 10-step. And I said, I can't do that. That's blasphemous. My old Catholicism. And he said, you got to get a bigger God. And I started working on it. I really did, with sincerity. And I was in this men's meeting, and there was a guy in there who had a sister that was on the streets of Hollywood that was a heroin addict. And she was a younger sister, and he was really worried about her, and he knew about my brother, and we started talking on the phone and talking at meetings. And he called me one night and he said, they found my sister in an alley with a needle in her arm. Will you come to her funeral? And I said, of course. And give me the address. And it was Hollywood forever. It was the same chapel I had been in twice before in the last 2 years. So for the 3rd time in 2 years, I'm carrying the casket out of the same chapel I'd been in twice before. Only this time, I never knew this person. And that guy that asked me, her brother, I never saw again after that day. He stopped going to the meeting. His phone was disconnected. But I was carrying her casket out because there was no one else to. And I got out to the sunshine, and I had a moment of clarity. I realized that everything that I'd been through with my brother and my stepmom, and anything that I counted something against me, I was uniquely qualified to help another with. And my God got bigger. And I started working with my God in terms of collaboration, as opposed to trying to make up past wrongs. And I can honestly tell you that is the higher power that I have today. I don't do things perfectly, but I understand that my higher power knows who I am. And I know how to bring things through the work to my sponsor, and 6th and 7th, getting quiet and then taking it to that higher power to become right-sized. See, I'll share another story what I didn't have to get drunk over or loaded over. It took me 20 years to include meditation in my spiritual toolkit. Not because I didn't want to, I just could not find a way that I could sit down and be quiet for any length of time. You know, this noise in here, even with the solution and the tools, and I mean, prayers I had no problem with because it's physical. You get on your knees or you sit quietly. It felt like an action. Meditation felt like just dead time. Until I met my last sponsor, who was a meditator. And I'm not saying anybody has to go to India to learn how to meditate, but that's how he learned. And he brought back a way that worked. I had met him in a past life. In my younger years, I was an actor, and I had gotten a part on a couple of days on this show. And everyone's very nice to you when you're a day player. And everyone was very nice to me, except for this one guy who was a lead on the show, a regular. And I saw him a couple of times in the days that I was there, and the look on his face and his behavior said, "Do not come near me." And he was visceral with anger. And several years later, I saw him in the rooms, and I said, "You're different. I don't know if you remember, but we connected." And I said, "What's different?" He said, "I meditate every day, 20 minutes twice a day." And I said, "I want to learn." I said, "I'll teach you." And he taught me how to do this practice, and he became my sponsor. What happened was that third child of mine, the baseball player, was in front of his school a few years ago. He was 16. He was going to a magnet school for performing arts. It's in Van Nuys, California, which was a rugged area. He had a privilege card that allowed him off campus for lunch, and he was walking back from lunch. And these two gang members across the street had it out with each other and pulled out guns and shot at each other and missed and hit my kid and a teacher. My kid was fine. The bullet went through one side of his leg and came out the other and missed cartilage, bone, muscle. The doctors, they couldn't believe it. 6 months later, he's dropping into the bowl at the skate park. You know, he was fine. I wasn't. I was out of my mind. I hadn't felt that kind of rage since I'd gotten sober. And I knew I had to do the work. So I started with the 10-step. I wrote a resentment list. I wrote who I was pissed off at, the reason, of course, what it affected. It was a 5-banger. Self-esteem, pocketbook, personal, sexual relations, everything. I wrote my unwillingness to accept the spiritual sickness of another child of God. I wrote that I'm a retaliator. I'm going to hurt these guys. I read it to my sponsor, and I wasn't getting relief. I wrote it several times. He said, "All right, I want you to pray for these guys for 2 weeks. And then we'll talk after that." And I started praying for them every day, praying for them to have everything that I wanted. And I wasn't feeling the relief. I had that fire in my head, in my body. I just kept replaying. If that bullet had been a few inches in either other direction, or what might have happened, I might have lost my son. I called my sponsor and I said, "I'm not getting relief. I don't know what to do." He said, "Meditate. Come and meditate with me." I said, "You're out of your mind. There's no way I'm going to be able to sit now, maybe in a month or 2 or 3. He said, "Come now." Went to his house. There were people meditating there, as there usually were. And this is what happened when I sat down. My first thought, when my mind quieted enough to have a thought that wasn't rage, was that the anger that I was feeling was the same anger that those 2 guys were feeling when they pulled out guns and shot at each other. And my next thought was, I want to be the kind of man that can sit across from the men's court and say, "I forgive you," and mean it. And I started working on it. And it took me a couple of years, but I got to a point where I was free. And it wasn't chin music, because what came to me was, what kind of life must these guys have lived? They were just a couple of years older than my boy. What kind of life must they have grown up in to bring them to a point where they would pull out guns in broad daylight on a busy street and shoot at each other? And then I was so grateful my kids hadn't been brought up that way, that I found compassion for these guys. That is not me. That is the direct result of the 11th step. You know, we say prayer and meditation, and I'm so grateful, if only for that experience, that I included meditation in my spiritual toolkit. What time did you say I needed to wrap up? I think have a few minutes.
You have about 5 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to finish with this story. This is Sage, my middle boy, who's one of us. My daughter, Violet, is not one of us. She's the one in the picture. She's on a spiritual retreat as we speak in Berkeley. I'm down in the desert, and we've had the privilege of watching her 5-week-old baby girl for the last few days. And Willow, we got to go to DC when she was born, when she was 4 days old last month. And then they came out, and they're coming back tomorrow, and we're going to spend another 10 days together before they go back. And she's not one of us, but Sage, my second, is. And he started using, unbeknownst to me, about the same time I did, 11 or 12. His grades dropped. He wanted this bicycle. I said, bring up your grades. I'll get you the bike. His next report card, he got all A's. So I got him the bike. He started riding it to middle school. He called me on a Friday and said, can I stay after to see this girl in this play? And I said, of course, just let me know when you're done. I want to come and pick you up. I don't want you driving the bike home in the dark. 10 o'clock that night, I hear a car pull up. He walks in. He doesn't have the bike. Now, I'm a spiritual giant. I've been practicing these tools for decades. So, I can handle that. Hey, just get it tomorrow. No problem. Next day is Saturday. I don't see the bike. I'm a little less spiritual. Hey, man, when are you going to go get that bike? I just bought that bike for you, leaving it alone over the weekend. When you get, I'll get it. Sunday rolls around. I still don't see the bike, and I'm not spiritual at all. I'm like, dude, get that effing bike home, or you're not going to see it. It's going to get stolen. Monday morning, I get a call from the girlfriend, not from him, that the bike wasn't there. It had been stolen over the weekend, and I was livid. I was furious, because doesn't he know what a spiritual giant I am? If he'd only listened to me, if he'd only taken my direction, he would have his bike, and I wouldn't have lost $400 on a fixie. And I'm pissed, and I'm going to let him know it. But instead, I do what I've been taught in AA. I do a 10-step. I write a resentment list. I am pissed off at Sage for being irresponsible and getting his bike stolen. This affects my self-esteem, pocketbook, ambition, personal and sexual relations, because if I'm a jerk, my wife's not going to want to get in the same bed with me. So it's a 5-bagger for sure. What is my defective character that if God would remove, I would no longer have this resentment? Well, unreasonable expectations. How responsible was I when I was Sage's age? Not as responsible as he is. Bully, because I'm going to get right up in his face and tell him what a dumbass he was for not listening to me. Retaliator. You know what, Sage? You can forget about bikes in the Maloney house from here on out. You're never going to see another bike again. And not trusting God. Because again, you guys told me I do my job here and everything takes care of itself. So I did the work. I called my sponsor. I read it. I did my 6th and 7th, which simply means if I'm expecting God to remove these defects of character, I have to know what he wants me to put instead. And this is what came up in my 6th and 7th. I remember when Sage was very little, he used to say, hold me, all the time. Come home from work and say, hold me. We were driving up to Sonoma to visit my mother-in-law. And it was when we just had the 2 kids, and my wife and daughter had to use the bathroom. We got out of the car on a truck stop, and it was cold and the wind was blowing. And Sage said, hold me. And the wind was blowing through our hair. And I said, I'm never going to forget this moment. And in that 6th and 7th, I remembered that moment. And I realized that it had nothing to do with the money that I was resentful. It had nothing to do with him not listening to me. It had to do everything with me being unable to protect my own kid from this world, this big, bad world. And my very next thought in that 6th and 7th was, you're right, you can't, but he can. And I was free. Came home, got on his eye level, said, I'm really sorry your bike got stolen today. I mean it. And I walked into my room. 5 minutes later, this kid that didn't talk to us, hardly a word, came in and said, Dad, I got to tell you what happened in history class today. There was a World War II vet, and he shared his whole day. Now, I always say to newcomers, if you're asking what that has to do with alcoholism, everything. Because left to my own devices, I am going to mess it up every time. I am going to act from Sean. And you guys have taught me to pause and put it through the God filter and be free. I'm going to close with this. I mentioned the synchronicity and the coincidences. I mentioned the one about the kid, my sponsee in the punk rock band, but I'll tell you the first one I had. Talked about that little girl that lived across the street, whose house I almost burnt down when I put the smoke bomb on her front door. Well, it turns out that she was the pirate's wench I met at the party that night. And had I not been willing to go out with my friend and do my job in AA, I might not have been at that party, and I might not have married her and had the 3 kids. Now, I would have had a great life because I'm doing my job. What I'm saying is that when we put ourselves in God's direction, in God's trajectory, everything happens as it's supposed to. So if there is anyone new here tonight, I just say, you're already doing your job by being here. Stick around. I promise you everything else will take care of itself. Thank you.
Oh my God, I love you so much, Sean. Thank you, thank you, thank you, man. You're amazing. And I got to tell you, it's really interesting.